Banditos, welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits, where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and bring you interviews with your favorite comic book creators of yesterday and today. Before we do that, what do you say we introduce ourselves? My name's Joe Marcello.
And I'm Warren Phillips.
And in this week's episode, we're bringing you an interview with someone who's worked for DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, and during his career, he's worn many different hats. Editor, illustrator. We're talking about none other than Eisner Award-winning editor Mark Chiarello. I really like Mark's work. Like I said, he's worn many hats over his career. Editor, penciler, writer, inker. He's been a part of so many great comics. Many different Batman Elseworlds, if you check him out. Countdown in DC, 100 Bullets, and of course, one of my favorites, Batman Hush.
And for me, as a baseball fan, this was awesome because Mark's done a lot of work for baseball. You're going to hear a great story about some of the work he did for the great Negro Leagues. Baseball cards he created for some of these legends who never had a baseball card given to them before. And you're going to hear a great story about that. So stay tuned. Mark is a fascinating guy. You're going to love what he has to say. So here we go with Mark. We'll be speaking to Mr. Mark Chiarello. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the time to speak tonight.
Oh, glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So the first question that we ask everybody is, how did you first discover comics?
I'm sorry, you dropped out for a second. Could you repeat that?
How did you first discover comics?
Oh, okay. Boy, I guess like so many people of my generation, it was through the Batman Adam West TV show. It was such a phenomenon. We were crazy about that show. You know, and growing up in the 60s and 70s, it was a good time for comics, you know, because Marvel was really hot then. And you know, in 60s, you had that Batman show. And I loved the Marvel cartoons, the Spider-Man cartoon and, you know, the real old ones and the Fantastic Four cartoon. They were great. I fell in love with that stuff.
Now, when you were watching the Batman show, did you see it as a serious show? Because we've spoken to some people and they were either in on the joke or they thought it was, you know, just a regular old action show.
Well, I was only 7 years old, so man, I thought it was real to me. You know, they were going to die. They were in danger. They'd always do that cliffhanger thing.
Mm-hmm.
I forget, it was like Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, and I'm like, oh my God, they're not going to get out of this one.
So where in your life did you decide, I want to make comics sort of, you know, a profession? I want to explore working in this industry?
That's a little weird because I wanted to be, since I was a kid, you know, I'd go to the store with my mom, the grocery store, and at the checkout counter, there was always the TV guide right at the cash register, you know, point of purchase. And Time and Newsweek were right there. And I'd always see these drawings, illustrations on the cover of those magazines. And I don't know why, but I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to, you know, I don't know who those artists are, but I want to do that. So I went to, fast forward a number of years, I went to Pratt Institute, the great art school in Brooklyn. And I had to pursue illustration. And of course, by the time I graduated, illustration was dead. I mean, Sports Illustrated and Newsweek and Time, they weren't using illustration on the covers anymore. They all went to, you know, photography. But I was incredibly fortunate to have as roommates John Van Fleet, George Pratt, and Ken Williams. They were my roommates. And man, all we ever talked about was illustration and fine art and gallery painting and comics, because we were all comics fans. And I remember, and George were drawing stuff for heavy metal at that time. You know, they were college students, but they were doing actual work. And I was amazed by that. And I don't mean to sound stupid, but I never made the connection that people actually draw comics. I mean, I knew people did, but I didn't know you could know people who drew comics. So Ken said to me, man, Mark, you should start drawing comics because you're the biggest comics fan of all of us. And there was actually a job opening at Marvel. I was a Marvel nut when I was a kid. there was an opening at Marvel. Archie Goodwin was looking for an assistant, and Ken, Archie's real cool. You should go talk with him. And I did, and Archie hired me, and that was 40 years ago, I think.
So, what's the biggest lesson you learned from that time at Marvel? Just starting out.
Man, I learned that the great thing about being in the business is the people. You meet the coolest people. I mean, John Romita Sr. was still the art director. He was my hero. Stanley and John Romita Sr. were my heroes when I was a kid. So one day, I'm kind of a quiet guy. So one day I screwed up my courage and I went into Romita's office, and I was fumbling and hemming and hawing. And I said, I really feel weird saying this, but you were my hero when I was a kid, and I just want to thank you for that. And he was such a sweet guy. He was such a genuine. I think he really appreciated that. He wasn't like, "Oh, kid, get lost," And we became friendly. And Archie Goodwin was the greatest guy on the planet. I don't know if you ever met him, but oh my God, people talk about him like he was very accurately talk about him like he was a genius, a great writer, a great editor, the funniest guy you'll ever meet. He was such a cool guy that I said to myself, this is the industry I want to be in. I want to do this.
Yeah, from all the folks we spoke to, it seems like nobody has a cross word to say about Mr. Goodwin. They've all said that was so helpful and he was so pleasant, and really helped them feel comfortable about being in the business.
Yeah, I love the guy. I had a great dad, but Archie was really my second dad, my surrogate dad. I love the guy.
So let's fast forward a little bit in your career. You get the project Batman Houdini, and that wins you awards. It gives you a lot of notoriety. What was your research process in creating that and putting the art together for that?
Well, I was on staff at Marvel, like I was saying, working for Archie, and being an artist, I wanted to draw my own comics, but I never had great faith in my own talent, so I sort of kept avoiding it, and I sort of took the chicken way out. I did the easiest. Well, colorists wouldn't think it's easy, but I took the easiest path. I became a colorist. I figured, okay, I'll slide into being an artist slow, and I colored a bunch of Wolverine stuff, and I was the first colorist on Hellboy for Mignola, and that's my claim to fame. I made Hellboy red. I remember saying to Mike lived in Brooklyn for a while when I lived there. We were good pals, and we used to go to lunch, and Mike brought his sketchbook with him, and he goes, "Man, I have this new character. I call him Hellboy," and he showed me the picture. And I'm sorry, can I curse on this? Can
Sure.
I say bad words on?
Absolutely.
Okay. I looked at Mike, and honestly, I said, "That's the dumbest fucking idea I've ever heard of. Hellboy? Are you kidding me?" Well, I was obviously wrong because it's one of the great characters of all time. But he asked me to color it, and I said, "Yo, man, I'd love to. That'd be great." And I looked at his art, and I said, "I think he should be red." And Mike looked at me and, "Gee, you think so? Of course he's got to be red." But I officially said it first. So
right there.
But then I slowly, I colored a bunch of comics, and it was really fun. And then I slowly segued into doing, the fully paint work in comics, because I was doing a bunch of mainstream illustration at the time. But yeah, that Batman Houdini was fun. It was really, I loved doing the research. It took place at the turn of the century. That's fun. Research is always the fun part of it. Drawing it is a drag. Actually painting stuff and having to do the actual work. Like I'm working on a Batman project right now, and I'm really enjoying it quite a bit. But man, it's a slog. People don't realize drawing comics.
I want to jump back a second about being a colorist, because you said that's how you got your start. what are some traits an artist should have they want to be a colorist? What are some skill sets they need in order to be a solid colorist?
That's a good question. You know, back in the day, they would anybody color the comics. You know, in the '60s, the '50s, '60s, the secretary had nothing to do. So hey, color this issue of Daredevil or whatever it is. Um, and then you had a bunch of really talented artists, not just lay people, but artists start coloring. And you had people like Steve Oliff and Matt Hollingsworth and Trish Mulvihill really bring art to that art form of coloring. Um, and it was a different process. I'm sure you know it was a different process. It wasn't on the computer in those days. It was you would color photocopies and have to code them. It was really this kind of process. And then the computer, you know, you had Photoshop, and some people created certain softwares to specifically to color comics, and you had this weird influx of it went away from the artists again. You had people, oh, I have a computer. My cousin has a computer. He can color this stuff. Well, your cousin's not an artist, so you had a lot of bad coloring right at the advent of computer coloring. But then it came right back to these great artists coloring.
I would think with an artist like Mr. Mignola that he uses so much shadow and so much dark and contrast with the colors. Um, what was your process working with him and sort of balancing that out with Hellboy?
Mike was great. We were such good friends. It was fun to work with him. And Mike really, to his credit, he never said, "Hey, I want this page to be all blues and then hit that orange over there." He trusted my talent, and he said, "Well, you know, on page 12 there's an explosion, so just make that orange." But he would never tell me how to do something. Um, and I love his work because it really speaks to me. The simpler art style speaks to me, like Alex Toth sort of drawings and Eduardo Riso, and Mike's the poster child for that, where you strip down any superfluous information, and it's just Mike's stuff is almost like sculpture. It's purely its design and its dimension. I remember one time, and I apologize, I know I'm talking a lot, but I just had a big cup of coffee. I remember one time being over the Alex Toth, the greatest artist of all time, the greatest comic artist. I was over his house one time, and I was showing him this is when Image was becoming real popular, and I had some Jim Lee stuff, and you know, Jim, who's a phenomenal artist, and Silvestri, all those guys. You know, when I showed it to him, and he said, "This is great stuff, but there's too much here. You can draw." You know, I distinctly remember him saying, you can put down 40 lines to define that shoulder, but try to put down the one line that defines. That's hard to do. And man, that to this day, it echoes in my brain, you know.
So I would love to discuss your time at DC as SVP of art design. I mean, how do you get to that point? And two, what is that experience like? Because you were at DC during quite a number of highs and lows, when, you know, DC was just banging on all cylinders in the 90s, killing all the heroes, bringing them back, hurting them, bringing them back, you know, which we all loved. And, you know, certainly up until the recent New 52 stuff. What was that whole first, you know, how'd you get to that point? And then what was that experience like for you?
Sure. I loved working there. You know, I've said it before, but again, because until recently, I never had much faith in my own talent. So I took this job at DC. Paul Levitz offered me this gig. Their coloring was a mess. Technically, Levitz asked me to come on, and a guy named Neil Posner, this great guy who passed away quite a few years ago, asked me to come on and be the first color editor in comics history. And And I did. It was fun, and you know, I got a paycheck every week, and I was having, you know, my ex-wife and I were having kids, so I had, you know, I had the security of having a full-time gig. But then right away, it sort of morphed into, I was asked to become the art director at DC, and of course I was flattered. Um, but you know, and you know, corporate America, you try to climb the corporate ladder, and you, oh well, they'll make me a vice president, and then I became a senior vice president. You know, and all along, the underlying um, coolness was just working with these artists and having fun. And I would love when someone, an editor, would say, man, wouldn't it be cool if we did this project like whatever, fill in the blank. But when they were jazzed about it, I'd be jazzed about it. And that was, again, I keep coming back to the people of comics. I loved that job because I became friends with Tim Sale and Darwyn Cooke, and Adam Hughes, one of my best friends, and all these great artists, even some of the old timers, Jim Steranko and John Buscema and Jose Garcia Lopez. I couldn't believe I was becoming friends with these guys and gals. You know, it was a really good job. I mean, it was high stress sometimes, and once in a while, even though I was the art director and I was the design director, which were two full-time jobs. Once in a while, Levitz or my eventual boss, Dan DiDio, would come down to my office and say, we really want you to edit something. We know you have all these great ideas, and we know you have a full-time job, but squeeze out a little time and create something. So that was fun too, because there, you know, there's a saying, I'll probably butcher it, I'm paraphrasing it, create the things you wish existed. And man, I love that saying, because I wish I had wished there was a black and white anthology series featuring Batman. It makes so much sense, right? So we created Batman Black and White. I collect old newspaper strips. I wish that DC would do our great characters in a newspaper in the form of a big ass, you know, newspaper. And we did that. We did Wednesday Comics. It was a good job. It was a really good job. I enjoyed, until corporate sort of shit on us all. You know, another company came in and bought us and let a lot of us go. And there's some great people at DC still. Certainly Marie Javins. There's some really great people, but it's kind of not what it used to be. It used to be a cool, fun place. Oh my God, we work at a comic book company. That's so cool.
Yeah, even as a fan, I think we're able to, I mean, without reading too much into what's in the trades and the news and everything, you know, it kind of seeps through the fact that it's been very corporatized over the years. And, you know, what once was this, you know, really fun place to work for the creators, it's not that it's not. I'm sure people that work there are still having a great time, but it's not what it once was. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was cool, guys. I'm telling you, it was fucking fun. You know, I was at Marvel in the '80s and DC through the '90s and 2000s. It was a job. Most of us took it seriously. You know, you have to produce every Wednesday. A new comic goes to the printer. You know, you have to produce.
What were your just as a fan, and you know, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I was just curious if what your thoughts were on the whole New 52, you know, initiative, and were you pleased with how it kind of, you know, progressed and things of that nature?
Yeah, you know, I know it's very polarizing. I know people loved it, and the other half, 50% of people hated it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was a cool challenge. I've never liked stunts. I've never liked, you know, company wide, we're all evil now, and I don't like that stuff. But this was kind of a fresh start, and it involved, you know, everybody at DC, editorial, production, design, everybody pitched in to make this thing a success. And I really enjoyed working with Dan at that point at the Dio. I thought he had some great ideas. He was incredibly energetic, and that was kind of his baby, along with Jeph Johns and a few other writers. I'm surprised I liked it as much as I did, because again, I don't like crossovers and stunts, and you know, I like when it's Spider-Man fighting Doc Ock.
Right. No, I agree with you. I will say that initially, as a as a big DC guy, I was upset. But I have over the years, I've really come to find a new appreciation for it, because I was able to discover characters, or really kind of dive into characters that I hadn't in the past. And I remember saying, telling Dan the same thing, is, characters like, Captain Marvel or Shazam and Blue Beetle and, other characters like that, kind of gained a new appreciation of. And, as a longtime comic book fan, I was familiar with those characters, obviously, but, I kind of latched onto them more. So, I think it's certainly it was a success in that sense. But my only beef was, there were all these stories that I think were really gaining ground and momentum, and then they just went away.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
was just so upset. And, that was probably the thing I was most bummed about. But hey, these things happen. And it all
I
comes
don't
back. Everything matters now. It's all
Yeah.
which, hey, I can appreciate that.
Yeah. I think we've been alive too long. The continuity has gone on for what, since 1939? It's changed 4 million times. And well, somebody said the best things in life are when you're 11 years old. The comics you read when you were 11, the TV shows, the music. And I kind of, I'm a big baseball fan. Baseball was great in the late 60s and 70s. Spider-Man was great in the late 60s and 70s.
I just wanted to follow up on something that you had said, because you talked about working with some legendary artists, a number of legendary artists, new talent as well. What was your approach? Because I know there's times you want to encourage talent with their art and what they're doing, but there are times maybe you're going to have some hard conversations about, choices they made and stuff like that. What was your approach to interacting with people? Because you had mentioned before that it's working with people that makes the job so enjoyable.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard, because I would become really close friends with a lot of the artists and writers. And, it's that old thing where you always hurt the ones you love. And I have to call Adam Hughes to scream at him because that Wonder Woman cover's not in. And he's like, but we're friends. I thought you'd give me an extra week on it. I'm just using Adam as an example. But I've had that conversation with every good friend of mine in the business. Like, dude, come on, man. I'm going to get in trouble. You got to hand that 8-page story in. Come on. It's a little, I think the answer to your question, it's a little like being a therapist, like a psychiatrist. You have to approach each person differently. Art Adams has a different personality than Jeph Loeb does, and so and so. You can't treat everybody the same. The artists that I really connected with, we never talked about deadlines or the job they were doing. We rarely talked about. I'd call Darwyn, Cooke, and talk about Norman Rockwell, or talk about hockey, or and then you get off the phone after 2 hours and they're all jazzed to sit down and do their job now, and I never played anybody. I never bullshitted anybody, because they were fun conversations, and these people were and are my friends. That kind of worked pretty well.
This next question, it might not have anything to do with you, but as art director, DC, had so many iconic characters that are used a lot for marketing, are used a lot for different toys and licensing and stuff. Did you ever have any push from sales or anything like that to, if someone wanted to really sort of take an extreme take on a certain character, them being a little cautious about it because that look or the character is so iconic, they might not be too keen on taking it on that direction?
That was more, I rarely dealt with that. That was more editorial. Once in a while, when they moved everybody from New York, they moved all of us about 8 years ago from New York. Our offices were in New York since 1937. They moved us all out here to Burbank, to Los Angeles. And, you know, a lot of people chose not to go, but about 40% of us did come over to, you know, and start working here. One of the carrots to get us to come was, one of the reasons we want to move you guys is there's more synergy between comics and the movies. And we're like, I mean, I'm sure you guys are monstrous movie fans, like I am, like everybody in our business is. So you're kind of like, oh man, that's cool. We can have some say in the movies. That wasn't remotely the reality of it. That was just some bullshit they said to get us to one of the things to move. So we really had no say about how to treat characters. If they were coming out with a new Batman movie and Ra's al Ghul was the villain, and you know Mike Carlin was doing a JLA thing where he kills Ra's al Ghul, the studios would say, you can't kill him. He's our big villain for the new movie. And it's, you know, you're selling 100,000 JLA comics and the movies are making millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's not hard to see who's controlling the outcome of that.
We're going to jump back to comics in a moment, but you mentioned you're a baseball fan, and you did a really wonderful, I think, a very important project, which was the heroes of the Negro Leagues. You did a number of portraits for them. These were gentlemen who had astonishing careers, but your average baseball fan might not know Turkey Stearns. They might not know, you know, all these wonderful players who changed the game with how they played it and, you know, what they did. How did that project come together, and why was it so important for you to be a part of it?
Thanks for asking the question. You know, I was a monstrous Yankee fan, New York Yankee fan growing up. My brothers were, my dad was. And my best friend, Jack Morelli, lives up near the Baseball Hall of Fame in upstate New York. He's about an hour drive from there. So every year we would go up to the Hall of Fame once or twice. And I remember there's the great hall where they have all the plaques of the people, of the players who have been inducted. And we're like, oh, there's Joe DiMaggio, there's Mickey Mantle, there's Babe Ruth, all our heroes. Wait a minute, there's a guy named Judy Johnson. Who the fuck is Judy Johnson? A woman? It's not a woman. And we read the plaque, and he was a great Negro League third baseman. And Jack and I were talking at lunch that day, and we're like, I don't know that much about the Negro Leagues. Do you? And, you know, I knew Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson, but that's kind of it. So we really looked into it, and I was approached by a fella who ran Eclipse Comics back in the day, a guy named Dean Mullaney, and they were doing trading cards also. But Sienkiewicz did like the Iran-Contra trading cards and the Kennedy assassination trading cards. And then they asked me if I want to do one. I said, yeah, I want to do the Negro Leagues. And they didn't know what that was, but they were like, okay, sounds politically correct. Go ahead. So we did these. This was 1989. We did them as a set of 36 cards. And I loved it, man, because we would go up to the Hall of Fame and do research on these old guys. And we actually got to meet. There was a reunion in Cooperstown of these guys. And some of them were still alive at the point. And Hank Aaron was there and Willie Mays was there. They started in the Negro Leagues. But some of these guys, Leon Day and Max Manning, all these great guys were there having lunch. And we were just hanging out with them. It was so cool. It was so much fun. So flash forward, I guess 15 years, a great guy at Abrams Publishing, Charlie Kochman, He's an old friend of mine. He runs the Wimpy Kid books, and they have a really great imprint now. Abrams comics art imprint. Alex Ross just did this beautiful Fantastic Four graphic novel for them. Anyway, so Charlie called me years later and said, "Hey, those cards you did, I love those. We want to do them as a book. Or, do you have any interest?" And I was like, "Of course I do." So I did like another 40 paintings, and I'm really proud of that. I'm really still to this day. We're going to reprint it. John Flesks at Flesk Publishing is going to reprint those next year. Reprint that book next year.
I think one of the coolest aspects, especially with the cards, is for so many of these players, they didn't get Topps wasn't making Negro League cards, back in the day. So for a lot of these players, your card might be their first and only baseball card or card of them that was ever created. So, you sort of immortalized them in trading cards with your art.
Thanks for saying that. Yeah, I'll tell a quick story. I'll make it short. I've told it before, and I probably will start crying because it's a very emotional story. Mm-hmm. We were at that, Jack and I were at that reunion of old Negro Leagues, and these guys were in their 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And we had just come out with the cards. They were in a little box, and one of the guys was the greatest player who wasn't in the Hall of Fame. This pitcher named Leon Day, and he was there. He was better than Tom Seaver and Satchel Paige. He was the greatest, but they were only letting a couple Negro League players into the Hall of Fame at that point. And he was there, and I went up to him very sheepishly. Went up to him and I said, "It's really an honor to meet you. We did these cards," and he's this short, old guy, old dude. He took out his reading glasses and he's looking through the cards, and I realized these are all his friends, and they're all dead. There's Judy Johnson, there's Satchel Paige, but he's also looking for himself, right? And he gets to his card, and again, I apologize, I'm getting a little emotional. He gets to his card and he starts crying, and he says, "I've never been on a baseball card before. I want to thank you." Man, that was one of the great moments of my life. And Jack and I looked at each other like, what the fuck? This was incredible. And oddly, a couple months later, he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. So he's in the Hall of Fame now.
That's awesome. That's really, really awesome.
That's fantastic.
Just other thing with the baseball is that you've done some other work with baseball as well. Could you have ever seen a career where you would have focused on covering baseball or doing art for Topps or something like that, or was comics always your first love?
I've done some stuff for Topps, mostly Star Wars cards. I wanted to get into sports illustration, and I actually put out a book a few years ago called Baseball 100, where I did all the drawings. It's the 100 greatest players. I love drawing sports heroes. I realized that my job is to draw heroes, whether they're my heroes or like Mickey Mantle or they're Spider-Man, they're heroes. I really love finding a good old photograph of, Ty Cobb or whoever, and doing a drawing of it. I really love that, but I'm not so much a fan of sports anymore. I don't like what they've become, and I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but what happened with steroids and all these rule changes, and I like drawing them, but that's it at this point.
Not a fan of the runner at second base on the ninth inning.
I hate it. I do like the pitch clock. I think that's pretty smart. I think it gets the game moving. But I've always been a baseball nostalgist. I like the old uniforms, these old boxy 1940s woolen things. They're much more fun to draw than the modern polyester or whatever they wear these days.
So I want to ask you, you've worked on a couple of like really interesting books that are kind of outside the, they're outside the comic book world, but still within it, I should say. So one being the Star Wars New Essential Chronology book. What is that like working on Star Wars and considering what, everything that has gone into Star Wars over the years. Now, this came out obviously before a fair amount of I believe the prequels and the new sequels, obviously. But there was all the books. There was all the other comics and graphic novels. Working on a piece like that, and there's so much to process and to include, and so much different type of you know artistry that goes into it. How do you approach a project like that? And it's Star Wars, and fans of Star
Yeah.
Wars are assholes.
They're passionate. Let's put it that way. They're passionate.
Well,
Uh,
yes,
I know,
so are
I know what
Star
you're
Trek
saying.
fans, and they're not as mean.
Well, see, I'm a big Star Trek fan. I'm actually, after this Batman thing, I'm supposed to be drawing a Star Trek graphic novel for IDW, but it's the real guys. It's Kirk and Sulu and
Okay.
Shatner. It's the real, and I'm totally digging it. It's real hard to draw something you love and you've thought about. Man, I wish I could get that gig. I wish I could. Um, like I was a really big fan of an old TV show called The Night Stalker from the '70s.
Mhm.
Sort of was the precursor to X Files. I love that's one, along with Columbo. Those are my two favorite shows, and I loved it. And man, I wish I could draw this as a comic book. And somebody called me, this guy named Joe, real nice guy, called me and said, "Hey, we're doing the Night Stalker comic book. We'd like you to do a cover." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you don't even have to pay me. Awesome," And but then I sat down to do it, and you can't do it the way you want to. It never comes out if it's so ingrained in you. It never comes out the way you wish it would. I did an okay job, but I sort of let myself down. And Star Wars is sort of the same way. It's so big. How are you going to do Darth Vader? How do you possibly do a drawing of Darth Vader? Everything's been done, but you want yours to be really, you know, set aside from everybody else's. Like he did the definitive Darth Vader, but you just can't.
Do you? I mean, is there a lot of involvement with Lucas at that time? Um, this was pre Disney purchase, as I recall.
Yeah.
And are they heavily in? I mean, I assume they are heavily involved in that, but um, is there? I don't even know how to. I wouldn't know how to attack something like that. It just seems like such a daunting task that you're basically putting together a timeline of all this stuff that's happened over the years, some of which doesn't count, others does.
Right.
And it just seems like it's quite an intimidating thing, but you have to illustrate this too.
Yeah.
And are you forced to encapsulate the look and feel of many different sources into one, or do you just kind of make your own?
You can't make your own because like Disney and Mickey Mouse, it's they control it, right?
Okay.
But like certain artists, I really respect the character. And that may be a silly thing to say, but I don't want to mistreat these great characters. So when you're doing a stormtrooper, it's got to look like a stormtrooper. Well, no, I want to do my stormtrooper, and he's in bronze. Well, you can't. That's not what a stormtrooper was. Um, I also got a really good manuscript, so I knew, okay, you have to do these 30 paintings. You have to do Vader and Princess Leia and all. When you say Princess Leia, you know what she's got to look like. It's got to be Carrie Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's. I'm just thinking back because I was a big Star Wars fan, and I'm just not anymore. I think they've sort of.
Do you have
That
any do you have any kind of room when it comes to those, characters that haven't been in movies, which, let's say at the time Heir to the Empire and you know, the like the Timothy Zahn books. Do you have
That was
any?
fun. Yeah, that was actually one of the real fun things was some of the characters were from novels, some were from comics.
Mhm.
Um, there was one, and I get to come up with the look of that character. So, there were a couple Jedi or who were the evil Sith. There were a couple early Sith guys. And I, had those funny names, those bad science fiction, blah, blah, blah. And I'd look them up and there was only like, well, he was drawn in a comic book. And, so I have to do the definitive version. Cool. I can do, like, there was a character named, she was one of the early Jedi. It was a female Jedi named Sunrider, Nomi Sunrider, I think her name was. I can't believe I remember that. And she had been in a comic and she had red hair. That was all I knew about her. So I asked my next door neighbor who had red hair, who looked very Irish. I asked her to pose for me. So, like, and then I did the painting based on the photos I took of my next door neighbor. But if you go look on Wikipedia, there's my next door neighbor as the definitive version of this character.
That's awesome. That's really cool. The other book you worked on was the DC Guide to Comics and Lettering, which I had a chance to look at once before, and I'm definitely going to purchase it again.
I've got a stack of them. If you want one, let me know. I'll send it to you.
I'll definitely, yeah.
Cool.
The when you go into creating a book such as that, is it more for teaching or entertainment? Because they're like those books like that. I find they're amazing, and I find it to be so fun. And my wife, who is a graphic artist, who's not necessarily a comic, lover to the level that Orrin and I are, for sure. I mean, she found it astounding. She was really enjoying it. Is it like
That's cool.
yeah, no, they're I mean, they look great. They're educational. For people who don't know anything about kind of what goes into that, I think they find it very interesting.
Yeah.
Is that what they're kind of created for, or is it more like kind of the flash shock and awe of kind of what comics industry is?
I think it's mostly for young people who want to know how to ink a comic. Or that was a great series. Denny O'Neil did the one on writing. Denny O'Neil on telling you how to write. That's giving you tips. That's awesome. Klaus Janson did the one on inking. I really kind of didn't want to do it because I had just had twins. My ex-wife and I just had twins, and I was pretty fried with just my responsibilities. But the
I'm
thing
right
is,
there with you as a father of
okay.
twins.
Oh, really? Congratulations! It gets better.
Yeah. Still time.
Are they little kids?
They're 8.
Oh, that's not bad. It gets better progressively. Mine are 27, so it gets progressively.
Oh, okay. Wow. Jeez.
Yeah. So I was overwhelmed and I didn't want to do it, but I didn't want anybody else to do it. I wanted to be the guy, your ego. I wanted to be the guy who wrote the book on how to color comics by DC Comics. It was a lot of work, and people still mention it. I think it was helpful to a lot of people who had no idea how to color comics, but sort of were interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, she really enjoyed it because she didn't really know kind of, and nor did I, but what went into, what goes into comics. She obviously reads what I have around, whatever piques her interest, but she found it very interesting. So definitely.
Very cool.
So before we let you go, I have one question to ask, and I know you mentioned you're a fan of kind of older styles, certainly as it pertains to baseball. What are your thoughts on comics nowadays and the style of comics that are being produced nowadays versus in the past?
That's a loaded question. I think in the old days, like I was a Marvel nut when I was a kid, and I would buy Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Thor. You'd buy the whole line, right? Especially Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But there were only 13 comics a month in those days, and they were 20 cents in those days. Now I still go to the comic shop here in Pasadena, and I'll always find something that really piques my interest. But they're usually the oddball projects, usually graphic novels. Like I just read, oh shoot, what was it called? Decorum. Was it called Decorum? It was a great graphic novel, really well done graphic novel. And I just read one. I think it was called Something in the Skies Above Berlin or something. But they're more espionage, spy stuff, slightly supernatural kind of stuff. There's definitely great stuff being produced today. I'm a little less interested in mainstream comics, although you still have Cliff Chang, and you have, you have I mentioned Eduardo Risso and John Romita Jr. You have some great stuff being put out still. I mean, do you guys read as much as you used to?
I do. I don't buy physical comics as much as I used to, only because there's not a shop close by. It's all kind of off the beaten path for me. But that's one of the good things I would say digital comics is good for, is that you can find anything that's out there pretty easily at your fingertips. And I will say that if you find a book that you find interesting, well, then there's probably something related to that you may find, that will be linked to it. So I appreciate that part of it. And I've been able to read some great big two books in series, some of which will piss people off. And I find that really interesting. So yeah.
I just wanted to ask quickly because I had spoken to Steve Rude a few months ago, and he was talking about coloring in comics. And I think he'd be the perfect person to ask. He was saying that he felt comics today are very dark, very muddled colors. He was, showing me, and he preferred the earlier comics, the bright colors that really pop on the page and really make you, excited to read it. Do you think that's true with colors now, that they are sort of toned down, a little more muddled, a little darker in the books?
I think they are. I don't mean to generalize. I think they are. But again, you have some great colorist working today. Some really incredible colorists working today. I just, again, because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, my love for comics is based on 64 colors, really. That old chart with the squares on it. I love that shit. I just bought a Hulk comic that Herb Trimpe drew. I actually bought it a couple months back. It's Hulk number 67 from 1965 or whatever it was, but I just love the look of that stuff. The printing sucked, the paper sucked, the dot pattern was real big, and it's all those things together make this gorgeous artifact. It's just, I like looking at, I don't need to read it. I just like looking at the stupid thing, But that having been said, there's some incredibly talented people, working in comics now. There's probably more great artists working in comics at the moment than ever in history, because there's so much product, and you have to be really great these days.
One last question for you is, you worked on a little project that I think kind of gets lost in the weeds, but you did a poster for the cult classic Mad Monster Party, which is a film that people in the horror know what it is.
Do you know that film? You know that movie?
I have it on DVD.
Oh, awesome.
So because how did you approach them? They approach you, and what was that like putting that together?
They approached me. I mean, I was a big fan of the Mondo stuff. I love their prints. They're just gorgeous. And I was like, man, I wish I could get into contact with these people and do something for them. And I ran into the fella that was running it at the time, a guy named Ishmael. His first name was Ishmael. Really cool guy, really nice guy. At San Diego Con, he came up to me, I think, and said, "Hey, I run Mondo," and I'm like, "The Mondo? Oh my God. Would you be?" He was like, "Would you be interested in doing a poster?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'll give you a list of 400 movies I want to do," you know? And that was a movie that I saw as a kid in the movie theater, and I think it came out in 1965. No, I was too young. 67 probably. I saw it in a movie theater, and I love that. You know, it's sort of again, it's the precursor to all the Tim Burton Nightmare Before Christmas stuff, and I think Harvey Kurtzman wrote it.
I think so.
The great comic book artist and writer Harvey Kurtzman wrote it, and Jack Davis, the famous Mad Magazine guy, did all the character designs for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at it now, the information for it, and I think you're right on that. I just know it's got Karloff in it, of course, the legend, and
Yeah.
Phyllis Diller.
Phyllis Diller, she's a riot in that movie.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. I highly recommend to anybody who's never heard of Mad Monster Party to go get it. It's so much fun. It's so much fun.
Definitely. So, what are some? I know you mentioned a few things that you're working on. Any other projects you have going on right now that fans can be looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean they're all a bit top secret, and I can't really get into them too much. But I'm drawing this Batman thing with Jeph Loeb, which is fun to draw Batman after all these years. It's not painted like Batman Houdini was. It's more traditional pen and ink and flat colors, and then I am doing this retro Star Trek thing for IDW that Adam Hughes wrote for me. That's fun because again, you get old and all you want to do is revisit your childhood. You know, it's like, oh man, someday I'll do Columbo. I'll do Columbo as a comic book, and then I'll be able to die because I will have done everything I wanted to do.
And we're back. This was a fun interview. Love talking to Mark. One, he's an old school monster guy, so love that about him. And I loved researching the various work that he's done. Again, I'm poor with names, so to go back and discover all the art he's done and he's been a part of is really fantastic. He did a great panel in one of the Blackest Night or one of the Green Lantern comics with all the different colored lanterns together. And it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, this is a great interview. And if you get a chance to, definitely check out Alien to Zombie, one of his books, and also check out DC Comics Guide to Coloring and Lettering Comics.
Yeah, Mark is one of those guys who folks in the industry really love and respect him because of the work he's done. When we announced that we're going to be speaking to him, there was a great turnout on the internet from a lot of folks in the industry, and you'll see why in this interview. He just has done so much. And again, that wonderful story he told about the old-time baseball player bringing to tears to see his own baseball card and the art that Mark did for him. It was a really cool moment. So, Mark, thank you so much. We'd love to have you back on. Thank you guys for listening. Please remember, rate, review, subscribe, and we will see you on Friday.